And we're back for part 2 of the day 2 lecture on arguments. There's a lot of material to get through in this hour, so I might just have to skip a few things on the note, just leave those to you to look at later on. But I do want to get at least through the pre-writing and thesis material, because this has got to be really helpful for you as we go. So I like this diagram of the overall writing process, especially because of these overarching questions. Why am I writing this, and for whom am I writing this? Who are the audiences here, and what is the rhetorical purpose? We're going to come back a little bit later this quarter to look at rhetorical techniques and appeals that can work with certain audiences, and you're going to practice that as well. But if you ever lose sight of these two questions, doesn't matter what you're writing, it's going to go off the rails, because you don't just write an argument for yourself. You write it to work with a particular group of people, readers, viewers, whatever the format is. And you're writing it for a particular set of reasons. The other reason I like this graphic is it reminds us that drafting and revision, the processes we're looking at today, are cyclical. They are iterative. They repeat themselves. So it's not just a matter of getting the draft right the first time. It's not just a matter of getting everything perfect and then saying, oh, well, that's that paper sorted. It's constantly going back and forth, figuring out how do I generate ideas, get information. That's where the pre-writing stage comes in, which we'll look at in a minute. And how do I use that to improve my paper as I go? So at some point, you do actually have to turn the paper in for a grade, but it's helpful to think of this as an ongoing process and not just a linear point A, point B, point C, and then you're done. We'll get into those elements later on as well. I want to introduce you to a series of tools that can help you do that. This is called close reading, and you may have come across this term in literature classes. We use it a lot to find ways to say understand a poem or a play better, but it can apply to a lot of different kinds of data analysis. I would summarize it this way. Close reading is a way to pay close attention to several elements of a text, and it can be any sort of text, or it could be a movie or TV episode or an artwork painting, for example. And each of these can tell you something significant about how that text works. For example, if you're looking at the linguistic element, think about why individual words are there. Why did the author choose to call something X instead of Y? Why did the producer choose to title this series or this show in this way? What do the actual words mean? What is strange or interesting or unusual about them? You can also think about how those words or images, for example, have certain denotations or connotations. A denotation is a literal kind of a dictionary meaning. A connotation is what that implies for a particular audience or a culture, for example. And connotations are often reliant on insider knowledge, on certain parts of an identity or kind of a familiarity that will make you interpret a word a certain way. So for example, when I first came to Southern California, first started working here at Cal State, I got an email sent to all the faculty, and it started, "Dear Yodis." And I thought, what on earth is a Yodi? Because that made no sense. It was not in my dictionary of the denotation, so I had nothing to launch into there. And the connotation was completely foreign to me because I was brand new to the area. Well, as I got more and more emails that talked about Yodis and coyotes, our mascot, of course, then it started to make more sense. The denotation, even if you say, hey, coyotes, they're probably not addressing literal coyotes. If they are, I'm kind of impressed that they have email. But the connotation is the important part. It says we're going to use this to emphasize our membership in a certain community. In the same way, back at Ohio State, my alma mater for the MA PhD work, we talked about Buckeyes and Go Bucks. At Illinois, we talked about Illini. And we would chant at football games, ILLINI, or at least if we wanted to go to the football games, we went to basketball games because we'd actually win those occasionally. So in any context, any audience, they're going to have different ideas about what words mean and what they imply for that particular setting. We'll talk about the patterns a little bit later as well, but on a general level, how is this organized? Is this an academic paper where the thesis is generally up front and it's defended by exactly 3 paragraphs, right? You have to have 3 body paragraphs? No, not really. But there are certain structural choices that determine how we read and how we interpret something. Think of a mystery or a suspense story. We don't know until sometimes the very end what's really going on or who the characters are or who done it. There are often going to be analogies and symbols. Sometimes these are comparisons. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Sometimes they might be something that stands in for something else. So in marketing and branding, the logo would be a symbol for a company or an organization. And there are always going to be elements of culture. Maybe you as the author chose to make an argument in some way to reflect what's going on around you. This is why, for instance, political cartoons are generally topical and they generally don't age very well. So like a symbol that we might make today that everyone would recognize, if we looked at it 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now and say, what was that about again? I don't know why that is significant. So this is why it helps to study the culture in which something was created to figure out how it might work. Let's get a little more practical then. The first thing you want to do when you are dealing with a text you want to analyze, as I mentioned in my last video, is to read it closely and annotate it. I find it helps to print out the text and do this, but if you have it on an iPad, for example, there's several tools or apps where you can actually circle and mark stuff up there. It's really cool stuff out there right now. But you want to pay attention to the important words. How is stuff defined here? What is used in maybe the title or a thesis statement? What stuff keeps coming up? I like the way Patricia Kane puts it. Note anything that strikes you as surprising or significant or that raises questions. So it doesn't necessarily have to be something that you have all figured out. Could be something you say, wait, there's something going on here, and I want to make note of this because it's going to come up later, I think. One of my professors put it a slightly different way. Find something that really kind of freaks you out. Where's the point where you stop reading or watching or say, wait, okay, something just happened. At this stage, you want to make notes. You want to start asking questions, and you want to back off from trying to figure out every single little thing that's going on. It might help to think in terms of movies or TV shows here. So in the first episode or the first 10 or 20 minutes, you may get a sense of who the characters are or their general setting or the main story that's being told, but you're not going to know everything yet. And there may be parts of the plot or the characters that are being deliberately withheld from you to give you a mistaken impression or ironic impression or something. Maybe you don't know that this character is actually mentally ill. Or maybe you don't know that this person doesn't really see dead people. Or maybe you don't know yet what the relationship is between person X and person Y. That's what the story is going to tell you. So in the same way here, focus on gathering data and then worry later about how you're going to interpret that for your actual paper. Once you have those ideas, kind of the raw data, you want to look for patterns in your notes. So if there's repetition, that's always a good place to start. It takes some practice to do this with a text, but we do it all the time in other genres. Think of a song you like. Chances are really good that there is a melody that repeats, and maybe there's a counterpoint, a bridge, or a harmony section. Maybe there's a verse and a chorus. In the same way, there are probably words or ideas or phrases that keep coming back up and show some connections between the parts. One of my favorite examples of this is Margaritaville by Jimmy Buffett, because you have this combination of the same phrase leading into narrative development. So you have several times wasting away again in Margaritaville, and kind of goes through that. But then it gets to the end of that chorus and the lines change. Starts with, I know it's nobody's fault. I think it could be my fault. Oh no, it's my own fault. And you can use that pattern as a way to see how the character is changing his mind about this whole situation. As you're doing that, keep in mind that not every repetition will be direct. There may be a partial repetition. You may see the word fire show up in words like fiery, or there may be sort of a thematic repetition, something that takes on a similar idea but twists it a little bit. So let's say you have these two descriptors, evil and diabolical. Now this is where our linguistic skills can be really helpful. So within the English word diabolical, we have the same root as the Spanish word diablo. Diablo, many of you know, means devil. And so if I say something is diabolical, I am suggesting that it's not just bad or evil or on the wrong side, that it is quite literally of the devil. That gives a certain valence to the claim. It might encourage readers or listeners or whoever it is to think of this character specifically in religious terms. And many people would see this as sort of a stronger claim than just this is evil or this is wrong or this is bad. And so pay attention again to those denotations and connotations in looking at synonyms. You also want to keep an eye out for tensions or conflicts and even contradictions. Sometimes they're set up deliberately. Maybe you have a conflict between two characters in a story. Sometimes the reader might not even realize that there's a contradiction in his or her argument. That can be a good grounds for disagreeing productively, which is the topic we'll look at next class. By this point, you should have a lot of notes and should have some sense of how the things that you've noticed, the details that you've gathered, fit together. Now you can start asking good questions about how that works and using those questions to get you closer to a viable interpretation so you can actually write the paper. So again, go back to your notes and ask yourself again, what's strange, what's interesting, what's unique, what's unexpected, and why? How is this working? Because the first time through, maybe you thought, that's a weird name for a character, or why is the color red showing up all the time? Or what's the deal with Truman and Dog Fancy? And the second or third time through, you say, oh, I see what's going on here. I can come back to this and see what's actually happening is this character is thinking this, and it's actually Jim who's in love with Pam, and so on and so forth. And so sometimes it's reviewing, literally going back and seeing it again, that will make the most sense to give you a better idea of how an element is working. If you come across words that you don't know, look them up. We have access to the Oxford English Dictionary, the OED, as well as the American Heritage Dictionary and several others through our library, because words do change meanings, not just in terms of the audience's interpretation, but of how things are actually, how they are used in everyday language. The big question to ask yourself here is, what else do I need to know, or what I want to know, to understand this text or this passage more fully? And I want to make a point here that the best analysis, the best arguments start from a position of ignorance. Not, hopefully, a position of stupidity, but a position of ignorance. You don't know something yet. You need to know, what is the best way to approach this problem? What have others argued here? What other findings are there? Because that's going to make you better informed, and it's going to help you decide where to go next. As we get to the end of the quarter, the goal of our literature review, which is basically your practice for the research paper, paper 2, is to find out what has happened before in this field. What have other people been arguing about? And how can I use that to potentially improve my own work? Once you get there, and I think my little picture maybe covered up some of this, but you can see this diagram of the funnel. I use slightly different terms here, but the idea is the same. So what I call this is the theme, the topic, and the thesis, and it moves from broad to narrow. So a theme is a general category, something big, something that extends beyond the text that you find interesting that you want to write about. Often this is what motivates someone to choose a text to write about or choose a given topic. So let's say you go into paper 1 and you think, I really want to write about public health with coronavirus. Well, the good news, there are thousands of articles to choose from, and those are all just published this morning. So you might start with that general theme, public health, but that's way bigger than any given article. So from there, you need a topic. A topic is specific to your text. And think of this as your magnifying glass. In the funnel here, this is kind of where you're narrowing this down. And you're getting to the point where you can isolate something that you can analyze more closely, getting that scope to where you can need it. You're going to end up with your thesis statement. I'm going to say a lot about the thesis statement coming up. This is a specific, arguable, and concise claim about your topic that you will support with the rest of your analysis. So a lot of this work happens in the first couple paragraphs of your paper, but all the stuff before that, that's where the actual resources is. We'll say ammunition, that's a little violent, but the actual stuff you'll be drawing from is where you're getting your notes. And that's where we come into pre-writing tools. So to go from topic to draft, you want to ask yourself 3 questions, and I've associated different pre-writing tools with each of these. I've given you links to most of them, and I'll highlight a couple of them so you know what they are. First, you want to ask, what do I already know about this subject? I suggested in my last lecture that you should approach any new information by engaging in that learning. One way to do that is to say, how does this connect to what I already know? What do I already know about writing a paper or a paragraph or a sentence? What do I already know about doing experiments? What do I already know about playing a piece of music? Because the basics there are not going to go away. If I had to drive from San Bernardino to San Francisco, well, I've never actually driven that route before, but I've driven a lot. And so all I would really have to do is say what applies from the skills that I have, the knowledge that I have, to get from San Bernardino to San Francisco. And there are going to be gaps there. Like, I don't know exactly what route I'm going to take there. That's why I have a GPS. I don't know, maybe, is there a toll road there? Or do I have to watch out for certain construction? Or right now, am I allowed to leave the house? Well, let me know. The details there mean that I'm going to combine ignorance, what I don't know yet, with knowledge, what I already know about this. And you can do the same thing in your writing. Several useful techniques here. Free writing is one of the most basic and the easiest ones to organize. It's kind of a low-tech version. The idea with a free write is you start with a timer, and I would keep it short, maybe 10, maybe 15 minutes, but I'd start even with 5 minutes can be useful. You set the timer, whatever app or software you want to use, and you get either a blank piece of paper, or I find it helpful just to start with sort of a basic prompt, like, what I really find interesting here is this, or what I see going on here is this. Start the timer, and you're not allowed to stop writing until the timer goes off. Now you're going to hit a point about halfway in where you have no idea what else to write. You will convince yourself momentarily that you've said all there is to say about that particular topic. And what I want you to do right then is to write, I don't know what to say, or, well, I think I've said everything here, but maybe there's something else, or I'm stuck. How on earth am I going to finish 1,500 words on this stupid paper? Because this is not about the content. This is about making yourself think through and write through those ideas. Now, you're going to come out at the end of the free write with a lot of messy ideas. Maybe the grammar is going to be a little bit iffy. Maybe there will be no punctuation on the entire draft. Or maybe you'll be immaculate because you're just that obsessive with punctuation. Right here. Whatever it looks like, hot mess or otherwise, use that to show what you're actually thinking about and how you can get closer to a usable draft. Looping is a way to formalize that process. With a loop, you take your free write, the one you just did, and then you write a one-sentence summary. And it could be in the form of what I want to say here is, or what I really find most interesting, or in summary, what I think is this. And that's going to be your starting point for the next free write. Reset the timer, start it again, write for another 5, 10, 15 minutes, whatever it is. And you'll get more and more precise, and you get more and more specific and closer to what you actually want to do with that story or that paper or whatever it is. Sometimes it takes 3 or 4 loops. Sometimes you get in the middle of the first free write and say, oh, that's what I wanted to write about. Go figure. And you're in good shape. Listing is a little more straightforward, as you might guess. Wait for it. You make a list of things you see. This is very helpful for any sort of visual analysis. When I teach English 107, I have my students analyze an advertisement. And I tell them, start by writing down everything you see. Don't worry about whether it's big, small, important, trivial. Don't worry about interpreting it. Just say, I see this is going here. I notice these words. I see these images. I see these colors. There's this pattern here. And eventually you will stumble on something that is rhetorically significant. Sometimes we'll do this as a class. If we have access to a whiteboard, then I'll just have people shout out things they notice, and we'll write down those details. Finally, clustering is more of a visual exercise. So if you are a visual learner or especially a spatial learner, this can be a good way for you. This works best, I found, with an actual blank piece of paper, but you can do it on the computer if you have better design skills than I do. Think of like a mind map or word cloud here. Clustering works along similar logic. You start in the middle of the page and you write sort of a big concept word, like your theme word. Let's say it's climate, and you circle it. And then you write a line to the side there, and you think, well, what's a word that I associate with climate? Maybe you write change, maybe you write weather, maybe you write, I don't know, Al Gore or inventing the internet or something like that. The idea is to show yourself what connections you can make, because that will help you identify potential things that could be part of your argument. It may help you clarify, I'm really interested in this part of the chart over here, and not so much in this section over here, but I also see these connections going off that I didn't expect. It's a way to kind of get you thinking what you already know here. The second question to ask is the writer's block question. How do I consider the subject in new ways? Question and discussion are pretty straightforward. We do this all the time in classes. So next time we will meet as a class on Zoom to discuss the 2 essays by Pierce and Diamond. And that will be a good opportunity for you to say, well, what's actually going on here? Because you will be writing about both Diamond and Pierce for various homework assignments. You can certainly ask questions about those in discussion, but you can also kind of just write those down or talk them through with someone. I mentioned last time that when I was writing my dissertation, I would sometimes just call my mom and start talking through what I was trying to do in a chapter, and she would ask me questions. And some of the questions, I thought, well, I totally covered that in chapter 1, but she had read chapter 1. And some of that I thought, oh, I probably should have thought of that before this. What would I do with that question? So it can be useful ways to shake some of the cobwebs off and to generate more ideas because at this point in the paper, you've got some ideas, maybe you've written a couple of paragraphs, but you're out of gas. And you need to think, what am I going to write about next? How am I going to connect this? What new element can I notice? And that is where cubing comes in really helpful. So cubing is a metaphor for looking at the different sides of an issue. It helps to think way back to ancient history of the 1980s. I realize most of you were not born yet. But the 1980s produced, among other things, the Rubik's Cube. And you have probably at least seen a Rubik's Cube, maybe in old home movies or something. You have all of the colored squares, and theoretically, people who are much smarter and better at this than I am can rearrange that cube, kind of twist it around, and so all the colors on each side match. Now, I want you to imagine you have a Rubik's Cube, but it's all jumbled up. This is what I would do if I had it for more than 2 minutes. And you put that in the center of a crowded room. Crowded rooms what we used to have when we were allowed to gather in groups of more than 2 people. Now, each person in that room can see the cube because it's in the center of the room, but they only see a part of it. They see that pattern, and they have to figure out, what would I expect to see on the rest? Even if they know the shape, that it's a cube, that's going to be fairly uniform, even if they know that there's going to be certain kinds of colors, they don't know until they can see it what's on that other side. So for writing, a cubing exercise is where you say, I've looked at this from this perspective. What happens if I move it? What if I twist this around? Get my example here. Here's my water bottle Rubik's Cube. At this point, I can see just the UPC symbol, which you guys can't because it's away from the camera. There it is. I can't see much of the label. So I might have to shift my perspective and ask, what's new here? And how does that help me approach my subject differently? In a creative writing context, that might look like, what happens if a different character tells this story? Or what if I tell this event from this other person's perspective? How is this going to look differently? What are they going to notice that I didn't see going on before? Lastly, the more advanced pre-writing looks at how can I use what I know, what I've generated, what I have thought about to generate usable text. Because you can have lots of great notes, lots of productive loops and great lists and great clusters and all these discussions, but if you can't turn in an actual paper, yeah, you're still going to get a 0. We don't want to get zeros. So here's where you get some more advanced methods. Outlining is going to be your best friend in a class like this. What I try to do for certainly your major papers and for several of these smaller ones as well, is tell you ideas for structuring your argument. So you'll see, so last time in the lecture on assignment 1, on paper 1, what those would look like, and I have that laid out in more detail on the actual handout on Blackboard. Whatever helps you get to a usable draft, use that method to outline. And that might be a few key words about the section you want to cover in each paragraph. It might be entire sentences, so you just kind of connect them and you have the whole basic paragraph there. It might just be, I need an intro, I need a body paragraph, I need a conclusion. Among other things, this helps you structure your time and helps you keep on pace for the rest of the paper. Because if you're intimidated thinking, how am I going to write 1,500 words? Don't think of the 1,500 words. Think of, all right, in my introduction, let's say I need 2 paragraphs. Let's say that's 500 words or 400 words or something like that. That's a lot more manageable. What can I do in those 400 words? What are my tasks? What are my resources? What can I potentially talk about? How is this going to help me set up the rest of this? If it helps, you can outline each part of your paper and just say, today I'm going to handle this. I'm going to sit down and I'm going to write 100 words on this and break it down. Because I guarantee you, if you get in the habit of writing 100 to 200 words a day, you're going to be perfectly fine for your assignments in this class. Summaries, something you'll do a lot of in paper 2, and it's just what it sounds. Take the idea, the source, and write it in your own words. One of my professors at grad school called this writing the paraphrasable argument. A sentence or two on what you read, on how it might be helpful, what you found interesting. And you'll be doing a lot of that in the formal papers, but it's especially useful when you got to review a lot of material. For my doctoral exam, I read 125, I think, sources. Some of them were novels or collections of poems because it was literature, but a lot of them were scholarly books. There's no way I was going to remember all of that. And so I got in the habit of writing those paraphrasable arguments, and that helped me a lot in studying later and kind of to cram for all the questions that I could potentially get. Journaling can work like questioning and discussion, but maybe it's a more formal way, and you don't have to journal in writing. You could hit record on your phone and talk through it. You could talk to a friend. You could find some way, maybe set up the video and say, so here's what I'm thinking about this paper. It's going kind of okay, but I'm a little confused about this. And what am I going to do here? A lot of researchers that I know will journal to themselves as they go through the process of observing and gathering their data and figuring out how they're going to analyze it. Because they think of things as they go that they may not otherwise remember. Lastly, discovery drafting is getting to where we kind of shade into the rough drafts. And this is a way to figure out what you want to say by figuring out how you get there. So sometimes you have to write your way into a claim. I can't tell you how many drafts I've read, especially rough drafts, where the student struggled in the introduction to set up a good topic, to establish a good thesis, but got through the paper, and then lo and behold, at the very end, there's a great thesis statement right there. But they had to write their way through it. If you're stuck on what your thesis is, maybe take a look at your conclusion. You might have surprised yourself by figuring out what you actually thought the whole time. So let's talk about the thesis. This is a difficult part of the paper because it is so important. So we're going to spend some time looking at a blueprint for putting these together, and I'll show you how a sample thesis could develop. I said earlier that your thesis is your foundation. It is the base upon which you build the rest of your paper. And let me tell you, when I grade your paper, I am all about that base, about that base, about that base. Oh, sorry. It's important. And so I've divided this into 3 different moves. As I said earlier, I define a thesis as a specific, arguable, and concise claim about your topic. Its goal is to open up your primary text. That's the thing you're writing about. And for the papers in this class, it should be clear by the end of your second paragraph. You really don't have room to go much further than that. So we're going to start with a claim. You've spent all this time in proofreading, making observations. You've noticed some patterns. You've got a sense of what's going on, and you're ready to say, okay, here is how this thing works. And it helps, I think, to approach this in almost like kind of an engineering perspective. What are the mechanisms in place here? So not just what do you see, but why do you see it? What is causing that particular effect or this particular technique? And you might start by just having an opinion. Here's an opinion. The cafeteria's fish sticks are gross. Now, I ate in the cafeteria quite a bit last quarter. I kind of missed the cafeteria. My wife and I are alternating cooking responsibilities. And she's a great cook, and I'm an adequate cook. But there's just something about walking in, swiping your card, and having access to like 15 different dishes, including cookies, that someone else has made, and knowing that someone else is going to do the dishes after you're done. It's a wonderful feeling. I haven't actually seen fish sticks in our cafeteria, but we can do a thought exercise and assume maybe the fish sticks are pretty gross. Now, we have a claim here. The problem is it doesn't really give us room for discussion. I said earlier that a claim should be potentially controversial. There should be room for counter argument. And right now we have an opinion. It is literally a matter of taste. So someone could argue with you and say, no, the fish sticks are awesome. But then you'd be back in the Monty Python argument clinic and you'd have to say, no, they're not. They're gross. No, they're awesome. No, they're gross. Rabbit season, duck season. And that's pretty much the extent of the argument. And so if you want to make your argument matter, you're going to need to do something more than just make that claim. You're going to need to move on to the second stage by making an argument based on your claim. And this is one thing you'll be evaluating in your peer workshops for both papers 1 and 2. What is the potential counter argument? How could you respond to this claim by approaching the topic differently? What else could you say? How could someone reasonably disagree with this person? So when I say potentially controversial, I don't necessarily mean that someone's going to say, oh, that is so out there and absurd and ridiculous, and how dare you argue this? I mean that someone should be saying, that's an interesting approach. I can see how you would get there, but what about this? So to get from a claim to an argument, we've got to open up those possibilities. And again, this is kind of a scary moment because this is where you go from the sky, it's blue, to saying, you know what, I'm going to say something that might be wrong, that someone might actually be able to debunk or criticize. And so I need to go out on a limb and take those risks. Here's one way we could do that. The prevalence of fried food in the cafeteria promotes unhealthy eating habits. So we've gone beyond our initial example of fish sticks. And one way we could do that is by asking, okay, is the problem with the fish sticks just that they taste bad? Or is there something that maybe we can attach a little oomph to, a little action at the end? Is there a reason that you don't like them beyond just your personal taste? And you might find that, well, yeah, it's not just that they taste bad, it's that they promote unhealthy eating habits. And so now we have a lot more room for discussion, because we could take each part of this and we could say, there's room to talk about this. And that's one mark of a good thesis, that it opens up room for further discussion. So we have several important parts here. First of all, the idea of the prevalence of fried food. What exactly constitutes a prevalence? Does this mean that every single option is deep fried? Are there other things you could potentially eat in the cafeteria? In Cal State's cafeteria, we've got, 6 or 8 different stations. And they have generally different kinds of food. Some are more focused on particular kinds of cuisine. There's one that's always vegetarian or vegan. There's always the pizza station. The pizza, it's okay. There's always like a kind of a comfort food. And of course, there is the sugar shack, or whatever they call it there. That's the dangerous part. So you could take a claim like this, and you could say, well, I take your point that some of the food here is really not that healthy. The fried food is maybe not great about this. But there are other options. You could also look at this qualifier in the cafeteria and ask, well, are there other things you could eat? Is anyone forcing you to eat in the cafeteria? Now, in a high school context, maybe the answer is yes. Maybe all or most of the students don't have an option but to eat what the cafeteria serves them. Maybe they don't have as large a selection. On campus, you might say, well, yeah, you could eat in the cafeteria, but we've got, a whole bunch of little convenience stores spread out. You could buy a sandwich. You could go to Einstein's Bagels. I love Einstein's Bagels. You could even go to the vending machines if you wanted something quick. For that matter, you could go off campus, kind of cross the street, and a couple little restaurants there. You could drive a little bit and go to McDonald's or Chick-fil-A or something like that. doesn't get you out of the fried food, but it's more options. So these are two grounds on which we could potentially critique this argument. And that's going to change in the context. At the Palm Desert campus, we don't have a cafeteria. We have vending machines. And the vending machine diet gets old really fast. But I had a lot of students who would be on campus from 8 to 5. And so that's all they had to eat. So that argument would work differently there. The last counter argument we could make here is this idea of promoting unhealthy eating habits. Of course, you'd want to decide, what does it mean to promote those? You know, is anyone, again, forcing to eat in the cafeteria? But also, what counts as an unhealthy eating habit? I would agree that if you're eating fried chicken or fish sticks or pizza every day, 3 meals a day, yeah, that's probably not a good thing. But it's also not good if you're not eating meals, or if you're just having coffee, or if you're eating Doritos instead, or even if you're eating kale 3 times a day, other than the fact that it would make you want to gouge your taste buds out because it's so terrible. You could argue that each of those constitutes an unhealthy eating habit. And so that might be an indication that you need to make a more focused claim, or that you need to deal with those counter arguments in some way. And we'll look in a future class about how to deal with those specifically. And so the third step here is the D. The argument should make a difference in how we understand the topic and how we act in relation to it. What I said earlier, the mark of persuasion is that there's action attached to the end of it. So here's how we could do it here. Given the link between fried food and student obesity, CSUSB should eliminate fish sticks from its cafeteria menu. Our specific example is back, and this helps us narrow down the discussion. So we're no longer talking about all fried food, because you might say, well, yeah, the fish sticks are pretty bad, but maybe there are other things in that category that aren't as bad. The French fries arguably are healthier than fish sticks. I don't know if that's actually true, but I know they're awesome. And I know that there would be a riot if we got rid of French fries. So maybe we can get rid of the fish sticks instead. We also narrowed down what specific health links we want to make. So we have this link between fried food and not just any unhealthy eating habits, but student obesity. This will open up opportunities for different kinds of evidence. Maybe you want to show studies showing this relationship. But it also opens up counter arguments. Because someone could say, all right, is that potential threat, is that potential problem enough to justify this action? How widespread is this issue of student obesity? What is the extent or severity? And perhaps the better question is, does that justify eliminating fish sticks altogether? Now, maybe you don't care that much about the fish sticks. Maybe you wouldn't eat them anyway, or maybe you don't eat in the cafeteria, or maybe for some reason this particular argument doesn't make a difference in your world. That's fine. But I want you to notice that the structure, the logic of the argument shows up in other places. We could make the exact same claim, same structural claim, I should say, and say, as Cal State did and a lot of other college campuses do, given the link between smoking and lung cancer, we should ban all tobacco products from campus. This is what has been done in many public places now. We could say, given that there are, this number of Muslim students on campus, we should ban all pork products from our cafeteria, from our restaurants. Given that, you can put in anything here, and even though the specifics are going to appeal or distress or somehow affect different populations, different audiences, you still want to ask the similar kinds of questions. Who should be able to do something about this? How are they going to handle this? And what is the appropriate way to go about this? Because right now, we have a lot of questions about who is at fault for the origination or the spread of COVID-19. We have lots of questions about what's the best way to use the limited resources that we have. We have questions about what's the best way to treat symptoms or prevent symptoms. Should we give a mask to everyone? What kind of mask? Who's going to pay for it? How are we going to distribute them? Should we require everyone to live in a plastic bubble? Probably not going to get quite that far. Should we put hand washing stations every 50 feet in public places? Should we continue to shelter in place until everyone is feeling better? These are real debates happening right now, and they use a lot of these same argument structures. Given the potential negative consequences of X, we should get rid of this thing. I started this lecture by pointing out that the skills and the techniques that you learn this quarter are applicable not just to academic papers, but to the public sphere. This is where the rubber hits the road. How are we going to make arguments in public? How are we going to make choices and vote on things and elect people and support policies that make a difference in our everyday lives? Who gets to make those decisions? And do we trust them? And those are difficult but important questions. And sometimes the discussions go on before we actually know what's happening. And we're stuck. We'll walk into the cafeteria one day and say, wait, where are the fish sticks? So, as you develop your thesis statements, keep those in mind. I'm not going to go through all of these in a whole lot of detail, but I want to include them for your reference. Some common thesis errors. All of these use examples from Huck Finn, one of my favorite novels. So if you find yourself getting stuck on a thesis, this might be a couple good places to look. I also want to give you this resource called the Thesis Test by Dr. Joanna Bashforth. She teaches at one of the Cal State campuses. I would say Northridge, maybe it's a different one. It's a good checklist to go through your thesis draft. First, you need a complete sentence and not just a question. I see a fair number of thesis drafts that start with sometimes even a rhetorical question like, how does this work? And I also want to write, you tell me, you're the student. I don't because I'm a nice teacher, but I want to because I'm a mean teacher. Is there the potential for an opposing argument? Is there a counter argument that could be made? We just looked at that in some detail. We'll come back to that question a little bit later this quarter. Is every word you use clear and unambiguous in meaning? And that doesn't mean you have to use small words in your thesis statement. In a lot of academic arguments, you need to be precise. You need to get a little technical. But it means your reader should know how are you using those words and what do you mean by them. So you might need to do a little bit of setup to tell them this is what the term I'm using and this is why it's important. Is this sentence a dead end? Does it give your whole argument away? Or does it call for additional information and explanation? Does this set up something else that you're going to do? Because it should. And is that claim appropriate for the scope of the paper? As I said last time, I love working with college students because you want to save the world. Sometimes you want to save the world in a 5-page paper. Doesn't usually work that way. So as you are evaluating your own thesis and your peers' thesis statements, think not just about what they're claiming, but can they defend this in the space that you have for that paper? And last, what evidence do you need to see before you're going to believe that the thesis is true? There should be something. There should be a gap there. You can say, all right, I'm willing to entertain this argument that we should ban fish sticks from the cafeteria, but I need to know how this works. I need to know why we're justified in doing this. I need to know that fish sticks are a clear and present danger to our student health outcomes. And those are the questions that drive the rest of your argument. That's where you anticipate, say, okay, I've taken that risk, I've made that claim, now I'm going to push this further and show you why it's important. As you go through that, you developed your thesis, you're working on your draft. I want you to keep in mind several evaluative questions, and these can be helpful for peer workshops as well as for just keeping tabs on your own work. First, think of ways to break down your paper into sections and ask, how does this particular part fit my particular goals for the paper? What am I trying to do in this part of the paper? Where's this going to end up? Don't just think of the content, think of the rhetorical purpose, because that might vary depending on where in the paper you put it. Are there particular expectations for the format or the structure? If you get used to writing for a particular professor or a particular genre, like a lab report, maybe you have to put things in a certain order. If you start a lab report with, here are the results we got from this chemical reaction, and then after that got to, oh, by the way, we're going to do this experiment where we mix this and this and see if it blows up. Kind of important to put that first and then figure out, what am I going to do with it and why is that important? You always want to write with your reader in mind. What does your reader know at this point in this paper or in the story or whatever you're doing? Because here's the tricky part. You know more than your reader, at least about your topic, your claim, your idea, your argument. And it's easy to miss stuff. We do this all the time when we're telling stories. You might be going through this whole thing. So I was at work today and we had this meeting and Dorothy was just going on and on and on about her stupid little project. I just wanted to slap her so hard. And your listener may be thinking, which one was Dorothy? Was she the Wicked Witch of the West or the East or another one? I don't quite remember. And they might stop you and say, who's Dorothy again? Because the names might flow together, stuff like this. Academic papers can work the same way. You have to make sure your reader can follow you by giving them the information they need to do that. Part of that might be thinking about the evidence. What have you already presented? What do you still need? That's something I spend a lot of time on in rough draft feedback. Is there a quote here that could support the claim that you make about how this author or this text works? Is there a number or a kind of rhetorical move that would be helpful? As we finish up today, I want to give you some tools to advance in that process, because you'll be doing a lot of independent writing in the next couple of weeks. And I want you to be able to set goals and organize your time, because none of these papers are going to work if you just sit down 8 hours before it's due and try to get everything in on time. I've been there, done that, and it's good for the Red Bull company, but not for anyone else. So one structure that I found helpful is called SMART goals. I mentioned this last time. I linked you to it in the notes here. You want to start with a specific goal. Identify precisely what it is you want to do, what resources you need to do that, and when you want to accomplish it. And the more specific you can get, the better. Now, it'll take some adjusting. Maybe you want to start with, at some point this afternoon, I want to sit down and do this. Depending on what your schedule is like, that might be okay. But you may get to a point where you say, I really need to work on this between 2 and 3 because every other thing is booked. Really solid. I've learned to be specific, for instance, in setting up my editing deadlines, because they always take a little more time to go through the projects than I think. It helps, especially in a writing task, to have a measurable goal. Sometimes that might be, I want to write a certain number of words. I found out when I was working on my papers and my dissertation that I could reliably write about 500 words a day of polished, academic, well-supported argument. That's 2 pages. So if I had a 50-page chapter, I could not start it the week before, well, the night before. It would just not work. And so I had to work backwards from there. And I just say, all right, I'm going to target maybe 250 words in the morning session, 250 words in the afternoon session. Or I might think, you know what? I have to teach Monday, Wednesday, Friday. So Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, Sunday, I need to work out more. I need to double that up. As I got comfortable with that target, I was able to pace myself better and occasionally to exceed it. So sometimes I'd really get going and say, okay, I did 750 words today. I did 1,000 words today. But I also had to know kind of where my limits were and how much I could realistically do. Because if I write 1,000 words on Monday, I say, ooh, that was great. I'm going to take Tuesday off. Well, I'm still at the same word count, but then I come back on Wednesday and I've spent Tuesday not writing. I think, oh man, what was I doing? I'm not sure where I was supposed to go with this. And I'm down to 250 words. And then I'm behind again and I have to catch up. So be smart in how you deploy this. It may help in some tasks just to give yourself a time limit. Often when I'm going through drafts, I will set a timer and say, I'm going to work on this for 15 minutes. And then I'm going to give as much feedback as I can and move on to the next task. I find that helps a lot with grading because I can move through a certain amount of time and I don't have to worry as much about getting X number of papers done every single time. Your goal should also be attainable. Figure out what skills or prereqs you need. You guys are all familiar with prereqs. You have to do them in college all the time to meet that goal. And this is the follow-up to that. If there's something preventing you from meeting your larger goal, then find something else you can do. So that if you don't have the parts to put this thing together, or you don't have, like, you're working on group projects. I know group projects, they're kind of terrible. And not everybody has contributed something yet. Find something you can do on your own. Find something that will get you part of the way there. Related to that is finding a realistic goal. Quoting from the website, a goal must represent an objective toward which you are both willing and able to work. I like the way that Stephen King put it. The thing that a writer needs most is a room with a door he is willing to close. And he's sort of playing on Virginia Woolf's statement a century before on having a room of one's own to be a woman writer. But he's also making the point that if you are not willing to give yourself that space to close that door, then you're never going to get the work done. And I think that's a good technique for academic writing as well. Maybe it's not a literal door. I don't know who you're sharing your living space with or how much space you have, but maybe your door is your headphones. Maybe your door is turning off your devices or putting on airplane mode. Maybe your door is just sitting down with your friends or your family or significant other and saying, look, I really need this stretch of 2 hours free in my schedule. Can you keep it quiet or take care of the kids or do something to help me get there? It also helps to think about motivation and kind of what motivates you. And I can't tell you what that is for you because it's very much a personal process. I have found that sometimes hitting a big step, hitting a bigger goal can motivate me to do other things. But sometimes it's just, I've accomplished something. Like, I got into the habit of just pulling out my planner, and rather than writing down all the stuff I needed to do today, I wrote stuff down that I did as I did it. So at the end of the day, I have a list. And now maybe it's not all the things I had hoped I would accomplish that day, but when I start thinking, instead of looking at that undone list and say, oh, I really should have worked harder, say, well, you know what? I got this and this and this done, and that was important. I didn't realize that was going to come up, and so I'm okay. Lastly, they should be timely or time-based. Use a specific time frame rather than just get this done at some point. And don't put off the smaller goals just because the bigger ones are farther away. This is one reason why I have you do something every single class meeting, twice a week for this class. Not just because it's good to give you practice in writing, to give you that discipline, but because if it's just the 2 or 3 big papers, then a lot of students will just not do the work. Not you guys, of course. I'm sure you would do the work regardless because you're good students. But theoretically, there are students out there who would procrastinate on college papers. It does happen, I'm told, in those other schools, probably Berkeley. I think Berkeley procrastinates. Whatever this looks like for you, it helps to sit down and write down what you actually need to do and how you're going to plan to accomplish that. Let me give you some tips from what I've learned in my own writing career and from teaching writing to my students. If you can, try to do your writing when you are alert, comfortable, rested, and focused. You're in college, so that's like 3 minutes a year. But this also can come down to finding the best time for you to do your writing. Your energy levels, your circadian rhythms, all that stuff is going to determine what's going to work well for you. Maybe you find that there are certain parts of the day that are really productive for writing, and there are others where you just need to do something else. I find that I cannot do effective writing in the morning. Like before noon, I have to do other stuff. So I use that time to think about email, to work on grading, even stuff like cooking and cleaning that doesn't require those same set of skills. Because when the afternoon rolls around, I know that's when I'm going to be most productive. I love teaching the afternoon classes because I'm awake, I've had lunch, hopefully, and I've had some chance to actually prepare for that. 8 a.m. classes, they're a little tougher. Put together the materials that you need. Certainly for paper 1, you will need a copy of your article. You'll need a copy of the instructions. Maybe you'll want access to the lecture notes or the videos. And then get rid of all the materials that you don't need. Chances are good you don't need access to Facebook or Instagram or Twitter while you write your paper. Music, it may depend on the task or your personality. I tend to play classical music when I'm working on editing because if I play music with lyrics, they're going to distract me and I might start singing and then everyone around me is just going to have a bad time. No one wants that. Do try putting your phone on airplane mode, or at least using the do not disturb tool so that, like, if your mom calls, all right, you'll take the call. But other than that, let it go to voicemail. If you can, give yourself an hour or so of uninterrupted time, especially early on as you get yourself used to those disciplines. Maybe your schedule doesn't quite accommodate that, but you can work on just about anything for 5 minutes. Build that up to 15, build it up to 20. Do take breaks. One popular method is the Pomodoro or the tomato clock. It's, I believe, 25 minutes on and a 5-minute break. It can work for a lot of people. In a rough draft, if you need to, put placeholders. Just put a comment there in Word, or even in the body of your text, put something in highlights. Say, I'm going to write more about this, so that when I read it, I can say, oh, okay, yeah, you really need to write more about that. Or maybe, you know what, I think you've actually covered that okay, but what about doing this instead? You will need to revise. We're going to talk about revision strategies in a later class, but it will be a part of your writing process. And I found that the intro and the thesis need the most attention and the most time. Lastly, some of the best writing advice I've ever gotten. I wish I got it earlier in my career. When you finish your day's work, park downhill. Now, not literally, because you could actually slide down the mountain in places like this. This wasn't a problem in Illinois because we didn't have hills at all. What I mean here is that finish off your day by taking some notes, reminding yourself what you want to do next. Maybe even jotting down a couple sentences for your next paragraph or your next section, doing some free writing, whatever it takes to give you some ideas. Because life will happen in between your writing sessions, and it may be a few days before you get back to the paper. I've definitely had schedules where I was teaching Monday to Friday and I had to write on weekends. Saturday to Sunday wasn't so bad. Sunday to Saturday, that was a beast. And so I had to write notes to myself or I would forget what I was going to do and I'd lose an entire day of productivity. So worst case scenario, you have a couple of notes, you come back, you pick up where you left off. Best case scenario, you start writing your notes, start writing your sentences, you say, oh, I can totally do this now. It's like when you are planning all the ways to clean your terrible, terrible apartment. Yeah, sort of did that. And you think there's this huge mess. I'm going to start by writing down that little 2-minute task. And it might be something like, for crying out loud, take the garbage out. And you find that it actually takes longer to write it down than it would actually to do the task. Those can build up momentum for you. That gets back into some of the motivation. Doing the small tasks can keep you motivated, keep you disciplined. So I hope you find these useful as we move into our writing section. If you find yourself stuck or you want just to bounce ideas off me, please come by office hours. I'll be here to chat with you and help you get past those boundaries, those obstacles rather. Our next class will be a Zoom chat session. So it'll be our first one of the quarter. We are going to be discussing in real time Jared Diamond's article, Easter's End, and Fred Pierce's article, Battle Over Climate Data Turned into War Between Scientists and Skeptics. You want to talk about a fun title. So lots of rhetorically interesting stuff going on in those. So for the 14th, you want to read those thoroughly in advance. We will also have some lecture material that day. So what I'm going to do is record that ahead of time, make it available to you on Blackboard. That will be focusing on templates for agreement and disagreement. Excuse me. So keep an eye out for that. We will gather for section 6 at 10 a.m. on Tuesday, April 14th. For section 5, we'll be at 2 p.m. And I'll probably spend about an hour. That's about how much time it would take in a classroom discussion. But we do have that whole 2-hour block set aside. I'm going to take attendance at the start. I'll be watching participation. So whether you want to participate in the text chat or on voice, if you really want to do the video chat, you can do that too. Please prepare some observations or questions so you have something to say. And make sure that Zoom is working correctly. So this could be a good opportunity to stop by office hours. I'll have office hours on April 7th and April 9th. You can come by, even just say, take 2 minutes, say, hey, I just want to make sure this is working okay. Maybe you have a question about the class, or you just want to help me put a face with a name. That's going to help. Other than that, watch for the lecture notes, and I will see you on Tuesday the 14th. We'll actually get to talk to each other instead of just talking into the void. I'll see you back then. Have a good day. Here's your official coronavirus greeting. Live long and prosper.